I want to welcome our caregiver community and our friends that are joining us this afternoon, and a particularly warm welcome to our very special friend and wonderful National Ambassador, Savannah Guthrie.
Hi,
Hi,
hi.
Savannah.
How are you? I was just looking through and looking at all the faces I see. It's so fun to have everyone join us.
As we've got people from North Pole, Alaska to New
Cool.
York City to Florida. We're canvassing the whole country here, and we're so excited for today. You know, most of you know Savannah by her role as co-anchor of NBC's Today, and she's had that role since 2012. But Savannah's really had an illustrious, and she's going to kill me for doing this, but I have to do it, Savannah. Illustrious career as a journalist, working as a legal and White House correspondent for NBC prior to her joining Today. But Savannah's also written two New York Times best-selling children's books, Princesses Wear Pants and Princesses Save the World. And I can tell you that I have nieces who are huge fans of Savannah's best-selling books. So check them out if you haven't gotten yours today. Savannah's also been a longtime supporter with her good friend and ours, Tom Hanks of Hidden Heroes in Our Mission, serving as an ambassador for many years. And we were so honored to recently bestow Savannah with our highest award, the Tom Hanks Caregiver Champion Award at our 2022 gala. That was fun, Savannah, wasn't it?
Oh, the best. Really beyond.
And as you all know, Savannah and Tom join us annually to host that incredible event that garners so much support and allows us to deliver our mission every single day. And Savannah, just know that what you do and how you help us does deliver support to so many of the folks that are joining us today. I just want to extend a heartfelt welcome to Savannah, and we're so thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. Caregivers are my favorite people. So I'm so happy to be with you and get to chat about this. And thank you for taking time out of your busy days to be with us.
Well, thanks, Savannah. I also want to welcome Meg Swanson, who is our 2015 Dole Fellow alumni. Meg is from Connecticut. And one of the things that Meg is known for, Savannah, is telling us what we should read. And Meg told us we needed to read this book. So did Amazon, because the site nearly broke down when the book went public. Our sites almost went down too, Meg, didn't they? For all the people who wanted to read it.
Oh,
But Meg is going to help us facilitate the extraordinary amount of questions. And Savannah, we sent you some of them, but they keep coming in that people have submitted to ask you about this really important book. Meg has just been such an incredible supporter on so many fronts. And Meg, we'll look forward to bringing you in to facilitate in a short bit. Does that sound good?
step aside, Oprah. Go away, Jenna. It's Meg's book club now with the Dole Foundation and Hidden Heroes.
Right.
Right.
Right. So Savannah, I'm gonna get right to it. And I'm gonna start by acknowledging that I'm one of 7 boys who grew up in a family all named for biblical figures. I had a really wonderful Catholic upbringing, went to church every Sunday. But I work in a world now where faith and God is not something people talk about. And you know, you took a big risk sitting in the chair that you sit in every morning, diving into a subject that people don't normally talk about. And I would just love to start with you talking about why it was so important. Why did you feel so compelled to take that risk and write about God and spirituality?
Well, it did feel so risky and scary and terrifying. And honestly, it wasn't something that I was like dying to do. It wasn't my idea, really. Although, it's interesting. You mentioned the kids' books. From time to time, having done the kids' books, I would get an offer to write something, like they even came to me once and asked if I wanted to write a cookbook, which is just hilarious because every Easter I Google how to hard boil an egg. Like I cannot cook. So it's just like funny that that's just kind of how publishing works right now, you know, for better or for worse. I know it's also frustrating for a lot of authors, but it's like if you have a platform, then you have an opportunity to write things. And so I'd from time to time I'd certainly talked about my faith publicly. You know, there've been articles written and it always seemed to come up because it's so much a part of who I am. And certainly my family and friends know this about me. So usually when I would be offered to write anything, I'd say no. You know, first of all, it's just too much work. I already have a job. I have two little kids, you know, I'm not looking for extra credit. But when about a year ago, I guess it was a year ago, February, someone came to me and said, there's a publisher and editor that wants to know if you'd ever want to write about your faith. I was on my way to saying no, like always, when I just paused because I thought, well, that's actually sounds like something that would really get me excited. Like, this is the thing I'm most passionate about. This is something I actually want to talk about and enjoy talking about. And it was kind of a thrilling idea. So I didn't say no right away. And I guess that's a way of saying yes sometimes. So I did a meeting, and even with just waiting for that meeting, I mean, right away, I just started having all these ideas and writing down. And I almost right away kind of had a vision for what I thought it could be and the different building blocks. And even before I had a book contract, I just started writing. And it kind of spilled out of me. It wasn't easy by any stretch. And so it's a funny thing, you know, I was really scared. And I actually said to the publisher and the editor, I'm not sure I'm going to have a book by the time we're done with this, but I'm willing to try.
Wow.
So, you know, we don't need to sign anything. Let me just try. And then I just started writing. And this is a long-winded way of saying, there's a time in my life when if you had told me, Savannah, you are going to write a book about faith, not only would I have not believed you, I would have been kind of horrified and mortified because there's a shyness about it's so personal, you know, and to put yourself out there that way. And the coolest thing, and I think it's such a God thing, is that somehow at just the right time, God almost made it seem like it was my idea in a way, or it's just something, it's not something I did out of obligation or duty. Like, oh, well, you've had all these good things happen to you in your career. You should. It wasn't a should. It was a want to. In
Wow.
the end, it was a delight. It was a joy. Terrifying, but a joy.
Savannah, before everybody was coming on, I was sharing the story that I was traveling back from Colorado last week and I had your book um, on my, little shelf there. I'm forgetting what it's called, the airplane.
The tray.
The tray, thank you.
Yeah.
The tray. And, when you're on an airplane, it's almost like you need permission to talk to your neighbor if you don't know that person. And she saw my book and she said, hey, I just finished that. And we spent the last 20 minutes of the plane ride talking about our own religious upbringing. And it struck me as I was leaving the airplane that I had never had that kind of conversation with anyone when I was traveling on a plane, a train, an automobile. But I think what I'm seeing your book doing, what I'm hearing from our community, what I'm seeing on television is this like energy that you're giving people, this inspiration that you're giving people to be forthright about our beliefs and our faith wherever we are. And and I didn't plan this question, but it just came to me. And maybe God inspired me to ask this. But are you hearing from people that have read the book that they're feeling the same kinds of sentiments, that it's giving folks permission? Maybe that's not the right word, but encouraging them to be more open about spirituality and faith?
I mean, that's been one of the things that has come from this that I could never have predicted, that fills my heart with such joy. And frankly, I'm just tickled about it because I just think like, I'm like, of course you did, God. I mean, how could like only you know? Because what I realized, I mean, just like even friendships I have had for years and years and years, suddenly we're having talks that are deeper and more fulfilling. And it's not, we're all sitting around saying, amen, amen. We all agree. It's not that. What it is just a way to talk about what you believe and why it matters to you and what speaks to you. And that's what's so interesting. I think no matter what faith you have or no faith at all, there's a desire, I think, right now in our culture to go deeper and to be more thoughtful and to be more tender more forgiving, more full of grace, more full of love. And I hope, I really, when I think about the book and people say, what's it about? I kind of say, like, I think it's a gentle call to be loved, and by God. And I think that tone is the tone that people are then taking into the discussions they open up, and I just love that so much. And I have friends that I've known forever. I have friends who, Jewish friends, Muslim friends, who are like telling me about what they believe and sending me scriptures that they like, or songs that speak to them. I mean, I think that's amazing, and I just love that it has opened up that lane, certainly for me, because I'm getting to meet and talk to people about it all the time now, but then hearing about others, like you telling me that about the airplane, that just makes me so happy, and it just, when we talk about these things, we connect with each other, we connect with God. And I think that's a form of ministry, not only like the ministry that we might be giving to someone else, but the ministry that we receive. And yeah, that's probably the best part of this whole experience.
Well, I just got the chills as you said that, Savannah, because what we're really hoping to do through this engagement with you and this discussion is to really encourage our community and one another to be more open about our spiritual and faith needs, because we know that the military and veteran community relies so much on their fundamental faith and spirituality and resources at home in their churches and communities through the VA. And we as a community, including the Dole Foundation, need to be better about leveraging those resources and connecting with our faith community partners to ensure that they're available. I want to follow up on, you mentioned, and I remember reading this in the book in your foreword. I actually loved that you wrote in your foreword, I know I'm pretty much not supposed to write my own foreword, but I'm going to do it anyways. And there was so much about the book that I loved about your honesty, and it just made it so much more relatable, I think, especially for people who may not have a strong faith journey themselves. But you do talk about how important it is to connect during moments of nothingness,
Mm.
and how those quiet moments are important, but they can become opportunities to connect with God, or to whichever faith tradition you believe in. And I think about you now, I'm a little biased, but I do watch you every morning. And I think all of our
You and my
community.
mom, thank you.
Um, and I follow you on social media, and I know how important your family and your kids are to you. I saw that your son was it a hockey game recently? Was it the other day? Saw his team lose or something. I think I watched it.
Yeah, went with his dad. Yeah.
So I know that you've got kids, you've got a family, and your schedule. How do you find those moments of nothingness? And can you talk? We serve a community that has so much demands on their own time, caring for their loved ones. What advice do you have to our caregivers who try to do the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard. It's hard in our world because of being busy and families and caregivers, just times 10 or times 100, the demands on them in every way. And then, just when we are so stressed out, and when you have that moment to yourself, you know what? It's not like you want to go get down on your knees and pray. Can we just be real about it? You might want to scroll through Instagram or go eat a bowl of ice cream or just do something that relieves your anxiety. And I think the book is a lot about saying, like, whatever you can bring, whether it's a lot of faith or a lot of doubt, whether it's devout and perfect prayers or just a messy, chaotic soul that's full of sadness or grief or resentment or anger, whatever you can bring for it, however long as you can bring it, that's good enough for God, that God can work with that. And so, in the book, I did this thing that I do it with my kids when we go to sleep. Like, we say our prayers and we do our thing. And then I say 30 seconds starting now. And it's just silence. And by the way, it's amazing how long that can seem, especially with little
Yeah,
kids. They cannot stay
yeah,
silent for 30 seconds. It's like, wow. And then we got to restart it again. But even if it's just 30 seconds of just sit there and breathe, I feel, in a way, you being presencing yourself to God, being present, is a form of prayer. I wrote the book and has all these what I felt like these, I think, are the building blocks of faith. And the second, it starts with love, and then it says presence. And I didn't say prayer because I think presence is before prayer. You know, I mean, prayer can come in a lot of different ways. I write a lot about different ideas I have that I've learned over the years about how we can pray even when we don't have the words, even when we don't even have the motives, we don't even have the willing heart sometimes. I still say, just bring it all, bring your mess, bring your mishigas. And so that to me is really just whatever little moment you can steal, even if it's 10 seconds, even if it's 10, you walk out of, the door, you're caring for someone, you close the door, you're on your way, maybe you're going to go make dinner or go get the prescriptions or go get it all ready. And you just sit, take a breath and say, I could use God, I could use your presence right now, or I'm here, or just see me. I think we need to leave a lot of space for God to do the rest.
Mm.
He's not looking for a flawless performance and perfect words. He's just looking for us.
My gosh. I don't know if you could see the chat, but people are talking about how much they love the 30 seconds starting now, because I think so many of our community are seeking those opportunities to find respite. And I love how you talk about just taking a moment in between administering those medications or running to those appointments to stop, breathe, reflect, pray. When I started working with Elizabeth Dole 11 years ago, I learned that she takes quiet time several times a day, which is her prayer time
Oh,
throughout the day, and how much that centers her. And I've learned to do that myself. And it's life changing to take those moments and connect and step back. And so,
it really is. And I'm, by the way, like, I think I say it, I'll say it, I have to always say it for anything I do. It's like, I am no example. I'm not holding myself up as an example of like perfect spirituality or moral rectitude or conduct. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a biblical scholar. And I stink at prayer. Okay. I'm terrible at it. And I'm also terrible at quiet. I'm terrible at all these things. But I used to feel really bad about it. I think it's partly like my Baptist upbringing. And it was like, did you have your quiet time this morning? Or, and in law school, I mean, I was reading 100 pages a day, but I'd wake up, I'd set that alarm 15 minutes early and I'd read my Bible. It was like, and I of course got something out of it, and many times would look forward to it, but it was also, there was a lot of guilt for me, or like, I should. And I guess what I've just realized, and then what happens is you can't do the perfect thing. So then you don't do it at all. And then you might feel kind of bashful or ashamed, like, well, God's not going to want to hear from me, or this. And it's just like, the older I've gotten, the more life I've lived, the more I'm like, no, enough with that. That is, God will take us just as we are, and he can do, as the scripture says, immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. So
mm,
just bring ourselves to him and let him do the rest. And I really believe that. It doesn't mean, look, there are going to be times in your life where you probably will have great devotion, and there'll be a great time of learning and all of that. And that's wonderful because it feels so alive. And then there are other times when your faith is at a low ebb. The biggest message of the book to me is like, that's okay, because God isn't ebbing and flowing. You can ebb and flow. He won't be. He'll
mm.
be right here. And he's not going to be right here saying, now what took you so long? Well, where have you been all this time? Well, I gave you this and that blessing, or this was supposed to teach you some lesson, some cosmic lesson. No, 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 no. God loves you. He is here for you. He's speaking to you always, always looking to communicate, always yearning to engage, not with our perfection, but with our questions, with our doubt, with all of it. And that's what I think, that's the message I really wanted to share. A message I learned not by doing everything right, but by doing so many things wrong.
Savannah, I think that's the message that a lot of people are taking away from your book. Some of whom, like me at times in the ebbs and flows of my life, where I haven't been and felt as connected to my faith. But that the way that you suggested that God is just there for us, I think is empowering to this community away. By the way, we say that caregivers give immeasurably more of themselves to their loved ones and to this community. And so that scriptural reference you had gave me the chills.
Gives me the chills to hear that,
Yeah.
because I mean, caregivers have like, they're the servant heart. I mean, they have, that's the way of life that we're supposed to all aspire to. To me, the caregivers are inspiring. Uh,
Well, they're inspired by this conversation. We're getting so many incredible comments in the chat.
I
And
don't know how to chat, but it's better. And now I see it. Okay. Can I read them later? Because I don't want to,
yes, yeah, we're going to record and we're
I
going
have
to
to
send
pay
it out to
attention.
you.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Savannah, you talk about vulnerability, and you yourself are very vulnerable in the way that you've written this book, which I mentioned makes it so relatable. And even talk about some of the struggles that you've had in your own life. Can you talk? I'm going to ask you to be vulnerable more for a second. Can you talk about the value of vulnerability and hardships kind of in the context of faith, and why you thought that was so important to talk about in the book?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, especially with this community, I mean, we just got to keep it real, because this community that is, if you are not only has your veteran and the person you love and care for, have they suffered? I'll say it, suffered, given, sacrificed. So have you. And so when I wrote this book, what I didn't want to do is, forgive my French, write a bunch of BS.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also thought, gosh, if I didn't know me and I looked at this book, I'd be like, what does this person know about any kind of hardship? I mean, she's got to have this job, and, I mean, everyone has their pain, everyone has their struggles. And so I wanted to, well, I would say, of course, I'm well aware of my blessings so far exceed any hardship, but I also wanted people to know that I did know about grief too, and I do know about disappointment. And you can't, I mean, first of all, I don't think there's a hierarchy of pain.
No,
I
I
don't
think
think you can be like, oh, you don't know, but first of all, you can, and objectively, some things are just, on another level, like the loss of a child or something like that. But in this wonderful conversation that I think we're trying to have, I hope that we all have a lot of grace for each other and understand that everyone is on a journey and every single human has pain, and that our faith is a place to sometimes find comfort for that pain. And also, I would argue, a place to bring our questions about why we're suffering, and that there's nothing sinful about that. I write a lot about doubt not being the opposite of faith, but being an aspect of faith.
Mm.
And your doubt may not be whether God exists. I mean, for me, thankfully, that's just not been a particular struggle. But as I write in the book, there have been times where I've wondered, is God good? You know, is God well-intentioned toward me? What's the plan here? And I'm sure many of our caregivers probably have experienced those moments. So, I write about the loss of my father, write about some of those kinds of difficulties. I write about, well, I write about a hard time in my 20s and 30s. I was married briefly and was divorced. I don't get into a lot of details because it is so personal, but that was a deep and very traumatic experience for me. And I just wanted people to know that I understood. I can't know what it's like to experience the hardships that others have, but that I recognize, you kind of, to walk in this life is to have, as I said, it's like your feet are burning on the pavement, and I just wanted to be real about that, and express to people that I understood, and that those times had made me question. And sometimes those times actually made me less than question. They made me withdraw
Mm.
entirely. Again, not from believing in God, but just kind of ice them out.
Yeah.
Just shut them out. Like, it's like any relationship. It's like a breach of trust. Like, really? And then, so I end up writing a lot about those big questions. Spoiler alert, I don't solve them. I don't know. We can't. We're just, why does God permit suffering? I don't know. I'm not sure we'll ever know in this world. We just know that this is not the world that God intended. And until that day comes, until it is on earth as it is in heaven, this vision of a humanity and God living side by side, until we're there, we don't have the answers, but we do have him. And I have found enormous comfort in that. And it's beyond anything I could write or express. And I'm sure many people who are watching right now know it viscerally, how incredibly sometimes in those moments, in your darkest moments, what you could never account for is that sweet saving presence of God with you. You couldn't put it into words. You couldn't make an argument or try to stand up in court and prove it in a court of law or prove it with facts. You just know it in your heart. And I certainly do too.
Savannah, wow, we don't have answers, but we always have him. Is such a powerful, resonating message to the community that I serve, because we hear from so many caregivers that they feel alone. And we like to tell our caregivers, and we often do tell our caregivers that they're not alone. And, in a world where folks can feel through social media or through peer networks judged or criticized or compared. I remember my mother growing up would say to me, God always levels the playing field, right? He sees us all the same. We always have an equal opportunity God, is what my mom used to say. And I think that's so important for our community to understand. Wherever you are, whoever you are, whenever you need him, he's there. And that's a big message I took away from your book. Um, Feelings, the darkest moments, the feelings of solitude and loneliness, he's there. And it was so powerful the way that you just said that. But I want to switch gears for a moment because we have a watch party happening in the Watergate. Senator Dole and others, and we know there's lots of watch parties
Oh,
happening across America.
oh,
But I want to talk a little bit for a minute about your relationship with the Doles. Uh,
yeah.
I know they consider you family, and you were there right with us when we lost Senator Bob, and I was in tears reading that part of your book. But you quote Senator Elizabeth saying, "I think that friendships that share faith are the best kind." And I particularly teared up when I read that because it was so gratifying for me to hear you say what I know she thinks of you in such a powerful way. And I'm tearing up thinking about it right
I
now.
am too. I love her so much.
In what ways have your relationships with the Doles impacted your own faith journey? Because I know it's impacted theirs.
Well, I just think their openness and their kindness and their generosity of spirit. I mean, you just have to think from my perspective, I'm a kid from Arizona. I grew up knowing about the Doles. How could I ever imagine that they would know my name, let alone be my friend? I always say Mrs. and Senator Dole and Mrs. Dole, Senator Elizabeth, like they pay me the greatest honor by inviting me into this journey and into this campaign for caregivers, which means so much to me. But really, to me, like the biggest thing I learned, and I wrote this in the book from them, is friendship, which I have million friends, and I love friends, but something about the way that they just wrap their arms around you and want those deeper connections. When Senator Elizabeth, I always call her Mrs. Dole, and I think it's just because I just love that, but I want to give her due. It is Senator Elizabeth. Okay, let's be clear. But Mrs. Dole, she, when you guys reached out to me about being an ambassador, I was like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. Okay. And they were like, they're going to be in town and they wanted me, me. And I was like, okay, great. And I just was doing my usual thing, like, okay, so should we do a coffee at such and such time? And, it's like, da, 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 just, I'm like Miss Efficient. Got this, but I got to get home, the kids, da, da, da. They said, no, she wants to have lunch, and I was like, oh, okay. And it was like, what I took from that and what was so fun was like, she wants to get to know you and wants to be known. And we had the most beautiful, fun lunch, and she's telling us stories, and it was a delight. And it just really reminded me, it's like what you invest in people is so important. And they invest in people, and they invested in me, and I have received so much more than I have ever given. But I love them. And I think that spirit permeates what this organization is and why all of us who are involved care so much, And so the caregivers are like, you mean, I consider you my friends, and I love coming and meeting you and talking to you and hearing about you. And it's Mrs. Dole and Senator Bob who really, that's the tone they set. And that's why it's so amazing.
Well, thank you, Savannah. That means so much, and you mean so much to us to be part of this family. I'm going to ask one more question before I turn it over to Meg and the community. And it's about our community. And sort of at like a 50,000 foot level, how do you believe the insights and experiences from this book can offer support and comfort to those that are on the Zoom with us today, or how we might be able to offer comfort and support to those that are beyond this Zoom? Sort of what are some of the messages in the book that might support that?
Well, I mean, the number one message is love. And I
Right.
said before, it's a gentle call to be loved. And then I would have added at the end, and to love.
Mm.
And it's really profound. And it's a simple message, but it's not an easy one. And it's not easy to feel loved when you are in the midst of the trials, when you're in the hardship, when it feels like you wake up and it's a day that's filled with challenges before you, when you feel alone or unseen or underappreciated, when you feel like maybe your dreams have been set off or deferred, and the things that you had hoped for, will they ever come to pass? Is anyone really seeing you? And so I hope what the book says is, yes, you are seen. You are seen by God. I mean, when you really let in this notion that God loves you and loves you specifically and meaningfully, if you can really fathom it, even for a moment, just let it penetrate your heart. It is transformative. I compare it a lot, actually, to, in the book, I compare it to being motherhood. And how I always say, like, parenthood is God's great metaphor, because not until did I have kids did I understand this unconditional relationship. The way I love my kids, the way I delight in them and enjoy them and relish their accomplishments and their little milestones. I mean, I'm just tickled to death by them. I just adore them. Well, God uses that same metaphor. I mean, it's shot through the scriptures. I didn't make this up, father to children. There's scriptures that say, like, be as dearly loved children, for that is exactly who we are. If you could let that in for a moment, that the way you love your kids is the way that God loves you, that God adores you. He doesn't just love you because he has to. He likes you. He gets a kick out of you. He's tickled. He's proud of you. Just for a second, let that in. Let it penetrate your heart. It changes you. Now, look, it's not something that you do once and then forget about. It's like if you're married, you don't say on your wedding day, I love you, and then be like, I'm not going to say it for 30 years. And if suddenly your husband's like, well, do you love me? And you're like, well, yeah, I told you 30 years ago on our wedding day. It's not like a one-time only situation. We have to remind ourselves, like, every day, maybe even every hour, that God loves us. But when you do kind of have that interaction with that feeling, what you'll find, I think, is that it starts to be something that can't be contained. And suddenly you're exuding it outward. And if there's anything I think our caregivers know, they know a lot about unconditional love.
You are
They're
so
personifying it. And so, and look, by the way, let's be real. I'm sure there are many, many times our caregivers, love is not what they feel. Love is what they're doing, but it may not be what they're feeling. Well, love is what God is doing too.
Such a powerful distinction, Savannah, and you're so right. A powerful message to our community. And we have so many members from all over the country here with us today, and we're so appreciative that you're tuning in from all corners of the country. I'm going to turn it over to Meg Swanson, who leads our Fellows Book Club and our Caregiver Book Club. And Meg, you've got some questions from caregivers all across the country.
I do. I have you, man, you guys showed up for this event. This is incredible. However, first, I am going to take a little bit of a selfish moment while I have you. Um, I just wanted to say that nobody ever understands my Stuart Smalley references. And when I saw that, I was laughing in the middle of the night and woke up my husband. And he's like, what's so funny? And I'm like, I'm good enough.
I'm smart enough and doggone it, people like me.
People like me. And he was like, okay. And just, I was so excited
Google
to
it
see
if you
that.
don't know it, right? It's
Oh
so
my
hilarious.
God. It is. Oh, and it just resonates with the caregiver. It's just amazing. The other thing I wanted to say about your book, so I have a master's in English creative writing.
Wow.
And from a technical standpoint, I really liked the conversational tone of your writing. It's really hard to translate that from the oral tradition into the written word, without coming off sounding too informal and awkward. And it was really lovely to hear the cadence of your voice as I was reading.
Oh, thank you. I
So
appreciate that, especially from our master's degrees.
I, yeah.
You know, my favorite thing that people have said to me, like, you know, girlfriends and stuff, they're like, it's so funny, Savannah, I can just hear you talking. It's like sitting around having coffee or a drink with you. I'm like, yeah, that's what I wanted it to be like, you know,
Yes.
not too stuffy and
Yeah.
kind of a little irreverent, a little naughty, a little just real.
Yeah, and you did that in like your parenthetical comments, just A plus. So okay, I have a whole list of questions, and some of them are going to kind of overlap, and we're going to jump around, and we're going to have a really good time. So you touched on this with Steve a little bit, but I was wondering, and Melinda S. from Bettendorf, Iowa, was also wondering, at the hardest times when you were writing the book, at the hardest times, how did you move forward?
Oh my gosh. There were, I mean, I think the hardest parts that I wrote were the parts that were about doubts and those impossible questions. I wrote about, you know, the notion, and that's so front and center for our caregiver communities. Why would a good God permit suffering? And I mean, that talk about I call it doubts mic drop. You know, I write about meeting a woman who lost her little girl at the school shooting in Newtown, and who's a woman of great faith. And I mean, I did something so far outside my comfort zone. I had seen a 60 Minutes episode with her years and years ago, and it was a kind of a 5-year retrospective after Newtown, and the interviewer asked her, she wasn't the only person interviewed, it was all different, how are Newtown families coping? But he zeroed in on this family, said their family of deep faith. And so then the interviewer was saying, you know, and what of that faith now? And I'll never forget what she said. She said, when I get to heaven, I want to hear 2 things. I want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. And I want to hear, hi, Mom. I never forgot that. And as I was thinking about those hard questions, I kept thinking about her, and I reached out to her cold and asked her to meet. And I learned so much from her, but still writing that, because I guess it's like, you know, but you don't know until you try to write about it. It's like, there are no answers. There just are no good answers. But I think what the essay is about not being afraid to bring our grief to God, and that he is not afraid of our grief, and that he knows grief himself. And then the other part of that was really difficult to write about was another concept that I felt was even more kind of out there and bold for me to say, especially without any theological background, you know, other than just being an interested student of the Bible and a thinker. But my book was reviewed by a theologian, so I knew I was like, well, I hope this one passes. But I write this, it's a chapter called An Act of God. And I'm asserting that God is not the author of pain and suffering. And sometimes we do try to make sense of the pain and suffering that we experience. And I would think it's like humans are so resilient and good-hearted. So they might say, well, I guess God just wanted me to learn XYZ lesson. Or, you know, they might say when someone dies, well, God has another angel. And this is my irreverent side. I never liked that, because it makes me just, even if I believe it to a certain extent, or even if I can see the good that God has brought out of a terrible circumstance, and I believe that wholeheartedly and have experienced it, I can't believe he's out there instigating suffering, even for the most important of lessons. And so writing about that And that very fine distinction between God is not instigating suffering. However, we have to acknowledge that we live in a world where God, for the moment, is permitting some of this pain. And figuring out how to write about that was the hardest, because again, there are no answers. The only answer, the one that I settled on, that I'm at peace with for the moment, but maybe not forever, especially as my personal circumstances change. I think we can be in different spaces with this, is to understand that this isn't the world that God intended, that faith is believing that this isn't how it ends, believing that there's a God who is bringing about a reality that will be on earth as it is in heaven, where there's no more suffering and no more crying and no more tears and no more pain. But that takes great faith to believe. And every day we may not believe it, but we try.
Wow, that was very sorry. So that was more like your personal, you touched on in one of the chapters about your career as a journalist and the headlines that you see, and you left out the political ones, but just bam, bam, and they are really hard. Has dealing with those headlines as a journalist and those stories as a journalist, as they've gotten more difficult, as the world has continued to seemingly implode in on itself, has that affected your relationship with God?
I mean, sometimes it does, and it certainly can. I mean, because first of all, when you start, and the thing is, I write about this overnight note I get, as the Today Show anchor, we get a big old briefing thing, and that's how I start my day. And I'm just like, whoa, some days I'm like, okay, I would like to go back to bed. Everything is terrible. But we all have a version of that, because social media, or if you turn on the news, or even your friends saying, oh, did you hear about this or that? And I mean, it's like, it's so easy to be discouraged. I think for one thing, when I feel that way, I think that's a moment to take your 30 seconds. That's a moment to close your eyes and, I mean, just pray. But I mean, there aren't even any words, just like, God, what is happening here? My heart is broken. I just can't understand what you're doing. I'm just beseeching you to heal and to be moving in our world. That's all you can, it's all you can really do. But the other thing is that sometimes, and this can happen in all kinds of different ways in our faith practice, sometimes when we go real global, it's a real obstacle to our personal faith. So we're supposed to live in this world and have care, concern, and awareness. We're not supposed to dig our heads in the sand and be like, oh, it's all about me. But so I of course believe we have to know what's going on in our world. But in the end, I also think we have to come face to face and one-on-one with God. And again, it's like to believe in God, to believe that God loves us, and then believing that, then to go out into the world. And this is how we are missionaries. We're missionaries simply by carrying that love and belief and hope and meeting people and seeing them. And when you do that, then one by one, little things change. One by one, you're in service to someone else, whether it's simply through a smile, or buying someone a dinner who needs a bite, or saying a kind word, or whatever it is, however small, you being a little agent of God's love. Imagine, I know it's idealistic, but just imagine for a moment that we all did that. See, then the world would change. So when I get totally overwhelmed and frustrated by how big the world's problems are, I first throw my hands up and say, okay, God, only you're God. Up to you to solve the whole big wide world. That's your area. My area is right here. I need to dig in and get the deep resource and well of God's love. And then I hope, having been rooted and established there, go out and look for ways with eyes open and a heart open, and that vulnerability and that feeling of safety that I can share what I have, not a hoarding mentality, not a fear, but a share, however I can, in what even little way I can, give more. And it's a profound thing, because of course, also, not only is that the right thing to do, and you're blessing someone else, which is wonderful, but of course, we all know you're the one who's blessed. When we feel a purpose, when we know we did something good or kind, or we lived up to our potential in some way, what a blessing. And so that's sort of that's my vision of what we're supposed to do. That's my theory of the case, that I'm trying to act out to the best of my abilities every day. And some days doing okay, and some days not at all.
So in that same kind of vein, but coming back, Susan K from Glen Olden, Pennsylvania asked, what helps you get back to a peaceful and hopeful state of mind after going through a time of deep sorrow and adversity?
Yeah, I think it's that. It's just like kind of, in a way, it's like you kind of do have to force yourself to these practices. And I just am like, I'm a big fan of low expectations of yourself, or low expectations of what you might feel. It's sort of just like do the littlest bit each day, every day, to the best of your ability. And I think over time, time being a great healer, I'm a big believer, although I'm not doing it at all, again, hypocrisy alert, but I have done it. And I know the practice works, is like, when you can write down and jot down in your journal, or writing just a little bit of how you feel, it's hard for us to see progress when we're like in our own lives. And sometimes writing it down or being open and sharing with a friend, it's like, we think, oh, I'm not getting better. It's just the same. And then if you went back a couple months later, you'd look back and you'd be like, oh, I forgot I was feeling such despair, and I don't feel exactly that way anymore,
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable. So I need to actually get on the stick with my journal writing again, because I have found that to be so helpful. And I don't know if everyone else I feel like I have like amnesia. I'm like, I can't believe I used to think that, or I forgot I was so stressed out about that, and then I go back and look and I'm like, oh, so it helps us see the way that God is working that maybe we don't see when we're just every single day in it.
Yeah. And so with that, and kind of that process of journaling and going back and kind of learning to live with your own uncertainty, how can we process that uncertainty and also process grief for someone we lost but is still alive? Cheryl from Palm Coast, Florida asked this, but this is definitely a question that I also think about on the daily.
Yeah, when you feel you've lost someone, but they're still physically there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is not an experience that I have personally gone through. So, I don't know if I'm even qualified to answer, but grief is grief. And I think acknowledging and actually surfacing that feeling and not feeling guilty about that feeling, I think that's what I would say to a friend who felt that way. It's okay to mourn the loss of the person that once was there, or the hope that you once had, or the version of your life that you thought it would be. It's okay to mourn those things. It doesn't make you ungrateful. It doesn't make you a bad person. It's not a betrayal to that person. I think, there's a Bible verse that God desires truth in the innermost places. And that to me is like one of the greatest comforts of faith, is that we can bring our whole authentic self to God. We can tell the truth. We don't have to hide from ourselves. We don't have to be goody goodies. We don't have to put on a smile. We don't have to find the silver lining. We don't. We can just come with our despair. If you ever read the Psalms, man, and I put this a little bit in the book. It's like the Psalms are just a complete taco. It's like the first journal, it's like unloading of like just total despair and zero perspective. And it is, frankly, sometimes disappointment, frustration, anger with God. anger with the people around, the betrayals, all of those things. And it's all in there. There's no sugarcoating. There's no gloss. I think now it's always like, oh, gratitude. And look, gratitude's great. And I read about that too. But there's nothing wrong with bringing your whole authentic self to God. Only when you do that is there any hope of comfort. And sometimes the comfort is just getting it out. It's just the saying of it, and I think it's not only okay, I think God welcomes it. Another verse, pour your heart out to God, for he is our refuge. He's a refuge. He's our hiding place. That's the healthy place to bring our despair. That's a healthy place to send it, And if you send it there, then maybe there's less chance you're going to send it to your kids or send it to that person you're caring for, but that frustrates you greatly, and then that way you won't be turned inward, and then you can stay on your own side, and not feel guilty or I should or I shouldn't, it's like, gosh, the numbers we do on ourselves in our own head. I think if you bring your whole self and you tell the truth to God and you tell the truth to yourself, and it's in your private moment, whether it's in a journal under lock and key or a prayer you say, or just something you think, prayer to me, everything is just like processing your feelings in the presence of God and let him do the magic.
I think that is so important for so many of our caregivers, because I know most of us knew our veterans before they went into the service in one fashion or another, and that grieving of someone we lost but is still alive is that, because no veteran comes back the same. And that message of bringing your whole self to God is so incredibly important, and to just be able to lay it all out. It's yeah. I am going to totally switch gears because we are unfortunately coming close to the close of the hour. This is just a super fun question from Sherry Piper and Diamond Head. Other than a reporter, in your wildest dreams, what would you love to be doing?
Oh my gosh, Sherry, I love that. Well, back in the day, I still do actually like to sing and play the guitar. And there was a time when I could sing much better than my voice keeps getting scratchier and scratchier the older I get. It's just like my mom keeps saying, like, do you have a cold? And I'm like, no, Mom, this is just how I sound now. But I think in my dreams, I wished I was like, one of these like folky singer-songwriter people. And I mean, I have a guitar right back there, and I am trying to get into it a little bit, but I think that's probably what I kind of wished I could be.
And you said that in your book too, when your mom got you the guitar, it was the gift you didn't know that you wanted.
Yeah, it was so crazy that she did it. I was like in my 20s, and just one Christmas, she gave me this little guitar, and I just started playing it and singing to it. And it was like only then that I started writing songs, and I was in my 20s and early 30s. I used to play and sing all the time. I mean, I was in a band, and I have sung at a million weddings. I mean, I seriously, like, I guess I could sing good enough that people did ask me to sing. And it's actually a great heart. I feel very sad that I don't think I sound good anymore. But one of my little bucket list goals, especially probably when I leave the Today Show and have a different kind of schedule, one of my goals is to sing and play again, and to learn Spanish, by the way. I love Spanish so much, and I know a little bit from growing up, but those are kind of my two goals. So I hope to find my voice again, my singing voice.
Love that. I have one last little selfish thing, and then you were writing about deathbed remarks. I'm thankful for the time God has given me, and you not believing that you would be able to say something like that. When my grandfather, right before he passed away, he said, God, what is that light? And we were all like, there is no light. It's totally dark in here. And he said, I know, it's the light of the Lord coming to take me home.
Oh.
So you would be so amazed the peace that gave him and my family. And I think as with true faith and true belief, that those words just come.
I think, my father, he passed when I was 16 and I have a heart attack. And that about 3 years prior, when I was a freshman in high school, I guess I must have been 13, he had a very serious heart attack. And I don't think at the time they really told us how close he had come to death. But at one point, I remember him telling me later, sitting on the back porch, and he said, when I was laying there in the hospital and I had all that stuff on my chest, he said, I woke up in the middle of the night and I knew it was my time to go. So I got up and I took off all the stuff and I went to the closet to put on my clothes because he said he felt it was the Lord telling him it was time. And he said, and the reason I went to the closet to put on my clothes was because he said it was just that easy. It was just a changing of clothes.
Mm.
And that he then, as he was standing there, he felt God say to him, he felt the boy like, what are you doing, Charlie? And he said, I'm ready, just getting ready. And the Lord said, no, not yet. And so I always remembered that, of course, never dreaming that a few years later it would be his time. But what really stuck with me is my dad saying how easy it was, just like changing your clothes. And I think a lot about heaven. I've thought about, somebody asked me on my book tour, do you believe in heaven? What do you think heaven is? And of course, if you grew up in a certain kind of upbringing, probably Steve with his Catholic upbringing, and certainly me with my Baptist upbringing, you thought a lot about hell, but then heaven was sort of like, oh, it's perfect, it's this or that. And when I think about it now, and of course, none of us can know, I think of heaven as just being with God. And I guess hell being the opposite, without. And and so to me, when I think about those hard things now, and I think about death, I think about with God. And my faith is so important to me. And the comfort is that when I go, I won't be with a stranger, but someone I know. And I think that's what this pastor that you mentioned that I wrote about, who had said on his deathbed, I'm ready. Send me home. Send me home. I can't wait to see Jesus. I can't wait to see Jesus. Because he was going to go see someone he knew, not meet for the first time, someone he knew. And so that is the heart of my faith. Again, I just heard a sermon and I loved how this woman said it. She goes, on the days when I believe this, and I think that's faith in a lot of ways, on the days when I can believe this. And that is not blasphemous. And that is not anti-faith. Remember that scripture in the book of the father who wanted his son to be healed. And Jesus said, do you believe? And he says, I do believe. Help me with my unbelief. That's it. In the same sentence, I believe. And I also sometimes can't believe. So I would just leave that there. It's a lot. I just answered. I'm sure I'm gone over your time, but on the days when I can believe this, I think is a good frame, and it's gentle. And I think it's in keeping with the gentleness, love, and grace that God shows us.
Well, Savannah, wow. Meg, we picked just the right person to facilitate the conversation with our community. Thank you so much. Savannah, I just want to call out a couple comments in the chat as we close here. A friend, Pat Ochin, said, Savannah, this is so deep and timely. I needed this.
Hi, Pat. I love Pat.
That's the best. You know Pat well. Another said, thank you for sharing your heart for God with us. This one really struck me, Savannah, as you were just commenting a short bit ago. One caregiver said, I've been mourning my future, but now I'm moving on. Thank you for recognizing that grief is real and that we can move on and that God is still there with us. That choked me up, but I heard you talk about that, Savannah, in a way that was just so profound to us and to this mission. And I know, you talked about Senator having lunch, but God brought us together. He involved you in this mission. And then one of the most popular messages in the Zoom, I'm leaving Zoom now to go buy this book. So I
love it. Thank you.
Yes.
Steve will send you one.
I'll send you one. For those in the community, let us know you need a book. Savannah, we love you. We are so honored that you'd spend this time with our community to share your heart and your wisdom and your reflections with us. I loved this book. My mom keeps joking with me that she's not heard me so fired up about a book in so long. I got my whole
Oh,
family reading it. My friends, I've got my niece's lacrosse friends reading it. It's just it's that easy to do. And I do, Savannah, before we leave, I want to point out that this is the month of the military child. So I have behind me the Hidden Heroes logo, but also the Hidden Helpers and the kids across the country who serve as primary, secondary caregivers to mom and dad. And I know how much you and the Today Show have helped us tell their story. So we want to salute all of our military kids as we salute you and thank you for everything that you do for Hidden Heroes.
I'm so delighted. I could just go on and on. I just want to say to the person that wrote it, said, I'm more into my future. I so understand that. And I just want to like leave you and everybody with like that word of hope that your future is still bright and beautiful. And God has his hand on your future. And it may not be the one we imagine. And so it's okay to mourn the one that we thought. But if I know anything, it's that God is quite good at transforming seemingly impossible circumstances into something beautiful and unimagined. And I just know that he wants that for every single one of us. And that's not a certain outcome or prosperity or this or that, but it is a future with him. And I do believe that there's something so sweet about that. And I hope that you feel that, and just know, all of you, that you're loved and you're seen. Caregivers, I'll say it again, you are the best people. You're the best people. And I admire you and revere you deeply. And so I'm sending all my love to you. A big hug. I wish I could hug each and every one of you, but thank you for sharing this time in your hearts, and keep finding each other, because that's what we're meant to be as humans. We're meant to connect. We're meant to love. It's what we're made for. So let's keep doing it.
Well, we're hugging you right back, Savannah. For our caregivers, you are loved and seen. And remember that we are here for you 24/7 when you need us at the Dole Foundation and Hidden Heroes. Savannah, we'll see you real soon. And thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.